Thank you.
So we are joined all the way from College Park, Maryland, right outside the beautiful Washington, D.C., by my friend Roberta Moore, founder of amoorer Financial Services. She does it all. We thank you so much for joining us. I've got a room full here with me at Belma Jackson High School for our personal finance class. We're recording this for all of our friends in Madison County Schools, Madison Central, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, and also for adjusting your time for us because they threw a little monkey wrench on me too.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Thank you so much, Greg, for having me.
No, we're so glad to have you. Now, before we get into all it is you do, you're originally from the DMV, and just give us a little background on your education, and how you kind of got into this financial sector.
Okay, will do. So I grew up in Arlington, Virginia. I'm a true Washingtonian. I was born in Washington, D.C. So I was born in Washington, D.C., and my mom moved to Arlington, Virginia. So my entire education was in Arlington. So I went to public school in Arlington, Virginia, Glen Carlin Elementary School, which I'm not sure if that's still called Glen Carlin, but Glen Carlin Elementary School, Kenmore Intermediate School, and then from there I went to Washington Lee High School in North Arlington. I mainly grew up in South Arlington. And then from there, as an adult, I moved to Maryland because I couldn't afford a home in Arlington. So what I was going to get a tin house in Arlington for, I was going to get a single family home, brick home with a pool in the back in Maryland.
Wow.
And they're right,
Yeah,
we're the DMV, DC, Maryland, and
yeah,
Virginia, so we're right across the bridge.
yeah, right across the Potomac River.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I read about you in Black News from my friend Dante Lee, and you have an incredible story of why you became so passionate about financial education in underserved communities. So just give us a little background on how you got into that and why it's so important for these kids, even now at 15, 16 years old, to start understanding why it's important to plan for that.
Absolutely. So I came from a family of humble beginnings, and I'm one of eight. My mom, we were on Section 8 in Arlington, Virginia. And then, so from there, I worked for the federal government as a stay-in school. So I worked for the Navy as a stay-in school. And then once I got out of school, they said, well, the position wasn't open for you anymore. And I had to leave. So I decided to go downstairs and take the civil service test. I passed the civil service test and they offered me a job. And so from there, it was, it was just a great environment. I lived in Arlington, caught the bus to Crystal City, and worked for the federal government. From there, I ended up wanting to do more. I realized that I wasn't going to be able to get the standard of living that I really wanted for my boys at the time because I became divorced from their dad. And so I said, on this salary, I'm not going to make it. I put myself through school. I finished school as a single mom. I also was able to, from there, what did I do? Oh, goodness. So I ended up working for a small minority owned business in Maryland. And that was a school of business for me. And they were a government contractor, a federal government contractor. And so I wanted to become an 8A, which is a SBA designation. SBA stands for Small Business Administration. And so I wanted to become an 8A because you get sole source contracts up to 4 million. And it's for those who are socially and economically disadvantaged. And so I did my own 8A paperwork. I ended up becoming an 8A company. I graduated in 2014, I want to believe. No, no. Let me get it right. Yeah, 2014. I graduated from the 8A program. So that was like the school of business for me. And I feel like the athletes and business owners, first generation wealth, we don't know what to do with it. And so most of the time we have CPAs and they help us at the end. A CPA and a financial advisor are two separate things. And then it's kind of too late. I remember I had a huge contract $5 million contract a year, and my CPA made me write a check for $150,000 to IRS. There's so many other things I could have done with that money, but it was too late. It was the end of the year. I owed. And so if we had talked about these things earlier in the year, I would not have had to pay that check. So, I wouldn't have had to make that payment. But I say all of that to say that I did really well in the 8A program. I was able to take care of my children, buy a $500,000 house, all of the above, create my own 401k through my business. And then I went bankrupt. I went belly up. So it's like I needed help financially. And so I was at this point where I said, I can't even die in peace, because a lot of times it's like you don't want your debt and all of your burdens to go over to your family. And at that time, I was thinking about my boys, and I said, would they still be able to have the same standard of living if I was to die? And so that's when I really kind of got myself into financial services and as well as financial education, because I just feel like we need to know. So I was preparing myself, preparing to die and set my family up. And unbeknownst to me, my son ended up passing away. Nobody would have ever known. I mean, nobody expects to precede for their children to precede them in death. And so I say that to say that I think that families need to know the importance of it. My mom, her mother passed away before her. It was a hardship on their family. They didn't have insurance. And so they had to pay for the funeral out of pocket. And as a result, my mom was very, very meticulous and very careful about making sure that all of her children were covered. So even my son was covered under me with my mom. Even I had my son covered, which means we say protected. So he was protected. But a lot of times, that was the least of my expectations. I was sure that it was going to be me. And so I say that to say, you're the youngest you're ever going to be. You're the healthiest you're ever going to be. So it's better to do it while you're young. And I wholeheartedly believe in whole life insurance because it has cash value. And so, I mean, and for the students here today, I know a lot of you may know Waka Flocka. Waka Flocka talks about, $1 million life insurance policy that he put on himself because he comes from humble beginnings and he's seen families go, broke and into poverty, trying to do GoFundMe's and all of those things when someone, when they have a loss in the family. So it's like you just have to prepare for the worst. And so Waka Flocka talks about it. And also, I want to say it was Shaq who said that he saw an older gentleman riding around in like a Lamborghini or Rolls Royce or something. And he said, I want to find out, what are you doing? You're like, 60, 70 years old. You got this Rolls Royce. What did you do? And he said, I'll give you one word: annuity. And so these things have they have tax shelters for you when they're tied to life insurance. And so a lot of times we become uninsurable. So if we're uninsurable, that means like we have like illnesses, we're high risk. And so a lot of times that's why you're better when you do it when you're younger, because you don't have high blood pressure or diabetes, or, you're not overweight, or you don't have all of those issues to worry about. Even for myself, I mean, because of my age, a policy for me cost like 10 times it would cost for a ninth grader or even a baby, And so this is what the I want to say the elites do. They get, when a baby's born, they put $1 million policy on the child, a whole life policy or IUL, and they use the money as they get older, the cash value that it accrues for their college education, to buy them a car, to help them when they want to buy a house or want to get married. They'll have that cash value in there, and they use the cash value. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and you talked about so many things there that I've talked about, and I've had other guests talk about, and it's important because look, I'm the first person to say it, and I did an interview with a magazine last year where I said rural communities were left behind in a lot of this education. This is a very hardworking community, but these kids' grandparents and parents did not have the resources that are available to them now. And you mentioned about with your son's untimely passing. Once that happens in a community, it's sad enough that we've had a loss of life of someone way too young or in a tragic accident. But if they're not prepared financially, it puts another burden on the community to try to help take care of those expenses at end of life. And the popular hashtag is no more GoFundMe funerals. So it's so important to understand that these things like life insurance, it's not a scam. It's not something to steal from you, especially if you have an employer that offers it. The rates are even lower then. So and I have kids all the time that think, oh, this stuff isn't important. I'm just in 10th grade. I'm not going to have to deal with this stuff. But then you think that, and then it happens.
Right. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that the working class is the most underinsured population. So I worked as a master general agent, and we worked with a lot of unions, and mainly we were dealing with police officers, firefighters, union workers, and they felt like they had enough. But the thing is that if you're no longer paying your union dues and you're not a part of the union, we've seen families, they are not in a position to bury their loved ones. So you still want to talk to others. I mean, don't be afraid to talk about your finances. And that's the other thing that I think of why I made so many mistakes is because talking about finances is like getting undressed in front of a stranger. It's very unnerving. It's horrible, but you have to, just go through it and talk about it. Some people don't want to talk about their finances because they feel like they don't have a lot. Others don't want to talk about it because they have too much or they think someone's trying to steal from them. So either way, you have to have those conversations, do your research, and be open, and then that way you can make the right decisions. And like you said, it's very inexpensive through your employer, very inexpensive when you're younger. And even if you can't afford a whole life policy, which tend to be more expensive than a term policy, still get something, have some protection. Because I have seen cases where families were, there was a poor family, but the father had a life insurance policy. All of his children acquired wealth, but they came from humble beginnings, all because that father had one policy. So you just never know what you're doing for your family.
Absolutely. And because especially when people come from humble beginnings, you may just see I'm going to get this job and I'm making XYZ an hour and yeah, I get a good paycheck out of this. And that's great. We really encourage all types of paths after high school here in our school district. But it's not just getting a paycheck. You've got to plan for things. If you want to get married, if you want to have a family, these are things that you have to be on top of. And look, I'm not even a financial expert. And even I say things like, if you're not at least putting in what employer will match in retirement, you're going to be working until you're 70. Because even my grandparents, they were able to depend on Social Security. Those days are long gone. Social Security may be around a little bit, but it's not something that somebody's going to be able to live off of at retirement age anymore. So putting aside just a little bit in a retirement account, starting as soon as you start working, whether you start working out of high school, out of community college, or out of a university, just putting aside something for a retirement account is so important. And I think a lot of kids don't understand that.
No, you're absolutely correct. And you don't feel it. And so the hour power rule is an old union principle, and it means that you take the first hour of your wage every week and you put that aside. So say you're getting paid $15 an hour. That's, what is that? Minimum wage here. So $15 an hour, you put that aside every week. So as soon as you clock in on Monday, your insurance, your policy is paid for. So you take that, so you work that first hour Monday and your family's covered. You do that every Monday for 4 weeks. What do you have? That's like $60 a month. You don't even feel it. So you go to cover your family. And that's just like if you want to go, that's the beginning. If you want to get a little higher, you would do an hour and a half. and then 2 hours of your weekly wage. I mean, your hourly wage. And that way you're protecting your family. You don't see it. So when you go to work, you say, hey, I'm working for my family's future, or I'm working for my future. This 1 hour goes to me. You pay yourself first. So that 1 hour, you put that aside. And like you said, if it's a 401k where your job is matching, by all means, yes, participate. And then when you get it up to a certain amount, you can take some of that money out and put it into an annuity. That's not taxed. They will not tax you for that because you're taking it from one, you're taking it from one investment to another. You're not just cashing out. But if you cash out early, then you're going to pay IRS. They're going to hit you, especially if you're not old enough. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's a great way to build up enough money to even put into an annuity because you don't see it. You're still living, you're doing your daily life and everything. You don't even feel it. And by the time you're a certain age, you have enough money to invest into an annuity, or you could take a portion of it, put it into an IUL. And so the IUL is attached to the market, but it's index universal life. So you can play around with if you want it to be in the global market or if you want to stay, here, but or a percentage of it, and you'll see your money growing. And whatever cash value is accruing, you can use that. You can borrow against it. So you become your own bank. So in other words, you don't have to go to the bank and ask for a loan. You are your bank. You call up who you have your IUL with, and you say, hey, I got $20,000 worth of cash value in here. I want to borrow 10, 15, whatever you want to borrow, and then you pay yourself back.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to what I want to talk about next because you mentioned banks. I think it's important to explain to high school kids that having a Cash App card is not having a bank account.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
Cash App definitely has its place. I use it. It's very convenient. It was a great development in technology, but that is not a FDIC legally insured bank. So, why is it important to start having those relationships with banks as people start working and becoming adults?
Okay, yeah, that's great. So I went when I started, I talked about how I worked for the Navy. And in order to get all my paperwork set up, I had to open a bank account. So I've been with Navy Federal for over 30 years. So when you start working, you want to have your money going into your bank account. So with direct deposit, like at midnight, your money is available. So if you need to do something, you stay up to midnight and go to the ATM and your money is available. So you don't have to get a check or anything like that. And then Cash App, like you said, you can't get an insurance policy with Cash App. They need a bank account. They cannot debit that. It's not considered an actual bank account and your money isn't secured. I mean, if Cash App shuts your account down, you might be waiting a couple of years before they finally figure it out that you have money in there and send you a check. But no, Cash App is great. I mean, it's great to, use money in between family and friends. You're out to dinner and you want to like, hey, I'll just send you the rest of the money on Cash App. I love Apple Pay and things like
Yep.
that. And so I think it's great, but you still want to have an established bank account. And like the credit unions are awesome. If you guys have credit unions, I mean, I've been with Navy Federal for 30 years or 30 plus years, and they have stuck with me in my ups and downs. Like some banks, they charge you a lot of, exorbitant fees and things of that nature. So I do recommend a traditional bank, but preferably a credit union.
Yeah, and a lot of employers offer credit unions. I know here in Jackson we have a very large postal employee credit union. So they literally go right across the street and do all their banking. A lot of state jobs offer credit union membership. So that is I mean, you mentioned Navy Federal, which deals with the military and their family. So finding ways to be a credit union member is a very good idea as well. Now, the
Yes.
last thing I want to talk about before I get to the students' questions
Okay.
is obviously you are an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And even though this is not my entrepreneurship class, I like talking about it because I have so many kids, and I can speak for all the other teachers as well, that have students that say, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to be my own boss. That's
Mhm.
great. But there is so much more to it, especially on the financial side, that is never talked about Because I always say you can be a great salesperson, you can have a great product, you can have a great brand, but if you can't manage your money as an entrepreneur, you're not going to be in business very long.
Mhm. So, what part of it you want me to talk about with the entrepreneurship?
So, so what are some mistakes that you see young people make when they become entrepreneurs when they're not paying attention to the financials?
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the big things is that say you have a contract and you're getting like $100,000 every week. And you think, wow, this is great. And so you get your first check for $100,000, but you didn't check all your expenses to make the $100,000, you have to pay 75 of it out. And so you start thinking you have all this money and you go buy a car. You go buy your favorite car, you go buy something that's exorbitant, and then you're hit with the $75,000 bill. So with the business, you have to be meticulous. So a lot of times we try to forecast ahead of time. So say you got that contract, and so you sit down with your CPA, your financial advisor, and you just sit down and you talk about what it costs to do business. And so a lot of times you don't think of the small things that it's costing you to do business. And all of those things add up. And then you look up and you're like, whoa, I didn't make 100,000 in profit. I only made $25,000. The rest of it all went to expenses. So you don't have $100,000 to play with. You only have 25,000 and you've already dipped into that. So those are the things that you see money. So it's like a lot of money can run through your hands, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all yours. And
Yeah.
so there's a cost to doing business.
Absolutely. Well, I do have some questions from the students, and these are really good. I'm glad they paid attention because they're asking some questions about things that you've talked about here in the last few minutes.
Okay.
This first one is Edward Flowers. He's in 10th grade, member of our band, and he's actually got two questions. He asked, coming from humble beginnings like you did, have you ever stopped and wondered how someone like you have attained all you have attained?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. So did you say his name was William?
Edward.
Edward. Thank you, Edward. I really, really appreciate you saying that. I don't think I think about it like that because there's so much more to obtain. And one of the things I think about is that one of my colleagues said that her grandmother was an entrepreneur and she had done really, really well for herself and her family. And she died. None of her children took over the business. As a result, they went back into poverty. So I feel like it's not just about what I have obtained. It's about, pushing it forward and having, what is it called? Generational wealth. So that's
Yeah.
really the objective is generational wealth. And so, like I mentioned, I have one son I lost. And so now I have two other sons. I had three sons. So my youngest son I lost, and I still have my family. So you may have seen her in here, and she kind of really took care of me for you guys. My niece, her name is Angel, and so she kind of fixed me up for you. She said she wanted me to look good for the ninth and 10th graders. And so she's off from school because they had the holiday. But she was here. And so I think about her. I think about the other family members and, just passing it forward and making sure that we keep it going. So Edward, that's really where it is. And it looks easy. And this is my favorite quote. It takes 20 years to become an overnight success.
There you go. Now, his other question, I like this one. He asks, I'm in high school and I want to start working soon. Why would a credit union be better to use than a bank?
Fees. Sometimes the bank charges you more fees. I think the credit union is owned by the people, so to speak, and they have more money. So I think they understand. So say the bank is charging you a $25 fee, the credit union might charge you a $5 fee. So those things make a big difference, especially if you don't have a lot of money. So, $25 could be the difference between you having, lunch and and not having lunch. Whereas $5, okay, I might not be able to get my $20 lunch, but I can get a $15 lunch today.
Yeah, and it's just so important. And I know I've talked about this with other guests to start building relationships with banks. If you want to buy a home, if you want to buy a car, they're going to want to see bank statements. they're not going to want to see cash app statements. So building those relationships as soon as you start getting paychecks is just so important.
Absolutely.
I like this one. This is Levon Johnson. He's in 10th grade, very talented photographer. And
Okay.
I think he's got a future in that. But he asked, what are some benefits that I should look for when I'm trying to decide on a credit union?
Benefits from a credit union. I think it's similar to Edward's question. I'd say the fees, how much money you have access to, like when you go to your ATM, those things make a big difference. You can protect yourself. I mean, the banks are good with protecting you, but I think like with Navy Federal, they have been very good. They are like on a whole nother level when it comes to fraud and things of that nature. So they really protect you. They know you and they know your moves. You know, they're used to your moves. And that's another thing I think that you talked about, Greg, is that make sure the bankers know you. So when you walk in the bank, they should know your name because they know that this is the branch that you live closest to, and this is the one you frequent. So, yes, you definitely want to have a relationship with your bank.
All right, I got time for one more. This is Shania Smith. She's in 10th grade, one of our volleyball players here. And she asked, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into the same field as you?
Oh, wow. My advice would be to work for a small business, preferably a minority-owned business, if not a government contractor. You know, whether it's a big business or a minority-owned business, but a government contractor, because that was the school of business for me. So exposure. And feel free to reach out to me. I would love to talk with her.
Yeah, and we're about to go over all that right now because we're almost out of time. And we thank you so much for taking some time for us. But before we go, a couple things. First of all, you mentioned that they want to reach out to your website, ceoroberta.com.
Yeah, that's my digital business card. My website is amoorer.com. AMOORER.com.
Yeah, and all your contact is there, all your social medias. You're such a great follow. Really, a lot of cool stuff you're doing, and we could have gone on all day with all the great things you're doing there in the DMV. But the last thing before we go, I mentioned how so many kids, and I know I can speak for all the other teachers that'll see this later. So many kids say, "Look, I'm just 15, 16 years old. I don't ever have to worry about this stuff. This stuff is stupid. This stuff is boring." Why is it so important to at least be familiar with the basic financial principles as they transition out of high school onto their next step in life?
Partly because you don't have any debt. You don't have any debt. So right now you're debt free. You get to start off on a clean slate and you get to build your future. And so by knowing what to do now and staying engaged instead of like I said, a lot of the celebrities, a lot of the athletes, they become bankrupt because they didn't know, they didn't have financial literacy. And so that's just, I mean, and a lot of times they don't teach it in the school system. So that's why hats off to you and what you guys are doing, because I didn't get this at Washington Lee. I did not. We did have a career center. I did do photography. I was able to do photography and I did cosmetology. I've never used it. I didn't go anywhere with it, but we did not have financial education.
Yeah, and I was the same way. I actually went to school in the district here. My old high school will see this later, and I just
Okay.
want to let them know how lucky they are to be able to have access to people like you with our, ever since COVID, we've gotten more technologically advanced, to be able to have access to great people and great resources. So those bridges can be crossed. The gaps can be closed, and they can create generational wealth for themselves. So we're up against it. We thank you so much for joining us, Roberta Moore, all the way from College Park, Maryland, CEO, founder of a more R. uh, and amoreR.com. We thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Okay, thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
See ya.